Okay.
I wanted to follow up what Wendy just said, that the work and a number of us on this call were involved in it. The IOSSP did an initiative around controlled vocabularies, the thing that Wendy's referring to, that George Alter was leading. They're about to come out with a set of recommendations officially and launch that, which includes some very specific input to the DDI Alliance around controlled vocabularies in social science and demographics. We should pay attention to that. And they are very much around the exchange and interchange of that metadata. So I think that the Wendy's point is spot on here.
Yeah, thank you, Arafat. So just on the sole member point, over the last year or two, the Alliance has encouraged organisations to have more than one representative. So someone for the scientific board, someone on the executive, someone as a member representative. And that's part of one of the reasons we did that, is partly to encourage not to get into a situation where there's just one person who's just the person who represents DDI for the organisation, so that when they leave, retire or whatever, that there is some level of continuity from that perspective, but also I hope that the organisation itself will continue to be part of the Alliance.
Yeah, well, I can say, I just want to, I really like the way that Wendy framed this, because I think that, well, it's absolutely true that it's important to have more than one person in order to make sure that the organization stays in DDI. And that's sort of good for our membership numbers, and it's good for our finance. But in terms of adoption, if an organization is using DDI throughout the organization, then there'll be lots of people who can be engaged with the Alliance. And I think that that's what we want to encourage, is that depth and breadth throughout our members, that they're using it, and therefore they can engage with the Alliance, and we don't have that kind of succession problem. And I thought that was kind of Wendy's point, that we need that breadth.
Okay, is there anyone else who wants to make a point? If not, we will move on. I'm going to swap chairs because it might make things a bit easier on the logistics at our end. So here's Hilde with the scientific board report.
You want me to pull up anything? You want me to pull up the slides? Please. So, check if they can see it. Yeah.
Hello, is it okay with everybody online? Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, very good. This is about what the scientific board has been doing since the last annual meeting. And we will start first to talk about who we are. And from January this year, I'm the chair of the board. Darren is the vice chair, and our members are Flavio Rizzolo from Statistics Canada, Ingo Barkov, who is here today and will present later, Jared as the director of the Alliance, ex officio, Simon Hodson from CoData, Wendy Thomas, also ex officio as chair of the technical committee, and Wolfgang Sankmölken from GESIS. And past members are Achim Vakarov, who retired last year, and Carsten Thiel, who represented SESTA for 2 years. And now again, since we are now having a meeting together, the executive board and the scientific board, I just would like to remind you about the role of the scientific board, that it has to do with the scientific work and technical work of the DDI Alliance, and to facilitate all the work that is going on in the working groups and coordinating, and also kind of making decisions about some points by providing direction. And we are developing a scientific work plan, which is usually biannual, but we'll go back to how we have been dealing with that in this year. And that will be based on the strategic plan of the executive board. We are overseeing the content of the standards and working products, and also would like to kind of provide best practices and promote the work of the DDI Alliance. And also we have the scientific community, and that is basically everybody involved with the scientific work of the DDI Alliance. Now, we don't have scientific representatives within the DDI Alliance, but maybe it would be a good idea to have that. We have member representatives, but not really representatives that form the scientific community. So, but we have in the bylaws something about the scientific community and its role. And our role here today is to inform the scientific community about our activities and also provide input for discussion. And that's what we will do at this meeting. How do we work at the scientific board? We have meetings, virtual meetings every month, but often we have meetings in between those as needed, because we sometimes have to do things that require more work from us than just this monthly meetings. And we try to organize physical and scientific mode meetings as well. We had one in Kur the 5th and 6th of September last year, and that was very greatly organized by Ingo Barkov. And we also tried to organize virtual scientific community meetings. Basically, everybody that are on the DDI users list are invited, and other communities as well. In this year, we had one in March, and we were then focusing on the updates of the scientific work plan. So then again, what has happened regarding the scientific work plan? We took the former plan 2022 plan and just extended it throughout this year with only minor changes. And the main change is that one of our tasks, it is in the work plan SB9, it is called. That is to scope requirements for developing a product life cycle policy and outlined methodologies, approaches to testing, etc. And that is just a change from task 1 and 3 in the 2022 plan. And also there is a new task, SB10, that is to set up a temporary working group to act as an exploratory committee for DDI ISO certification. That has been on the block for the DDI Alliance for the long time, but now we try to explore the possibilities for this a little further. And then a new one also is SB12, that is to identify candidates for advisory members to the scientific board. That is new, and we will also need to outline what the role of the advisory members should be. And now we are moving to what we did in relation to the scientific plan. We had one point about internal proceeding and operational guidelines. There a document has been produced, and we have also reviewed procedures, release procedures document from the TC, and we have agreed on that. That is all set. And the relationship between the scientific board, TC, and working groups, that is that we have, for each of the groups, we have a contact person from within the scientific board that can be a liaison between the board and the working groups. But we also would like to have more meetings together with the chairs of the scientific group, working group, and us, and also the chairs of the executive board together. But so far we haven't done that, but it is an aspiration for us. And then working relationship with executive board, that is quarterly meetings we're having between the chairs, and there we try to sort out things and the next step and things. And then regarding promotion of new working groups to accomplish the work of the scientific plan, that has been a very successful outcome of that, basically driven by Ingo Barkov. And thanks to this initiative, we now have a DDI developers group, and a hackathon was organized. And Ingo will tell more about this later in the meeting. And we see this as a great achievement, and we thank you very much, Ingo, for initiating this, and to Olof and Johan, who are also now in the lead of this. Then we had some reachable short-time goals that we set up for this period, and it was to define a roadmap for portability between the versions. This is something that needs to be in collaboration with TC and other groups that are working on our products, and it has started, but this is something that we need to continue and move forward on. And then promote more collaboration between the working groups. Then we have the contact persons, and we are also working group reporting, which is good. And the developers group is done. Guidance of which parts of the specification to use. That process was started slowly, and promote development of technical DDI services and DDI URN. We have had a temporary working group working on that, and we need to do some follow-up. We would like to continue with that. And here you can see our other tasks here. An important thing is to establish organizational level relationship with external standards, and there we got a W3C liaison. That's an official liaison from W3C, Pierre-Antoine Champin, who has also been helping us with RDF and other things. And Flavio Rizzolo is working together with others here, Van Gregory, to find a UNECE contact. And Simon Hudson is working towards this advisory nominations. And then the web pages from our side, we are fine with that. A life cycle policy, that is also something that needs to be worked further on. The ISO temporary working group ISO certification hasn't started, but it is on the block. And also the 1 or 2 advisory members has just started. And then we have for the scientific plan next year, that is to support further development of implementation guidelines, to promote standardized queries and exchange protocols. And this has to be continued in our next presentation, that is update for the next scientific work plan. Our next activities is a physical meeting oh, this is, I think, something wrong here. Let me see. I can just stop now. It is in it is in Bergen in September. So that is our next step. We will continue the work on the scientific work plan and also on the open tasks for from the plan we are currently within.
Stop. then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any questions?
See anyone?
And then you, Jeff.
I have a question.
Right, so the next item is elections. Oh, is it? Okay. I have
see you.
elections,
Sorry,
yeah.
no,
So I'm gonna share my. See my screen. So this is an election cycle for both the executive board and the scientific board. We're seeking nominations for both. There are 2 seats eligible for election on the executive board and 3 seats eligible for the scientific board. And so if you're interested, or if you know of other good candidates, please email the secretariat at ddialliance.org address. Applications are due by mid-June, and then we'll hold elections. The executive board, just as a reminder, is the policymaking and oversight body of the alliance. It shapes the strategic direction and makes decisions on allocation of funds. Elected members must be representatives from full members of the alliance. There are 2 seats eligible. Libby has indicated that she is interested in running again. She filled a spot for someone who retired. And I see Libby waving there. Hi, Libby. And then there's an open position for Karsten, who left CESDA. I'm sorry, if this is the executive board. It's Bill, who will not be running again. So we have an opening there. So 2 seats we're looking to fill. Libby, again, has indicated she's interested in serving and will be up for election. And then we'll need to find at least one more person to run. And so thank Libby and anyone else who's interested in running for the executive board position. The second is the scientific board. Just a reminder, scientific and technical body of the alliance is the scientific board. It represents the scientific community and facilitates formulation and execution of the scientific work plan, which Hilde just outlined. Elected members can be representatives from both full members as well as associate members of the alliance. There are 3 seats eligible. We have Darren, who's up for re-election again. I found it online. I thought it was good. That was great, in fact. Wolfgang, who I saw also online right now, is up for re-election. And then there's an open spot. Hi, Wolfgang. For Karsten, who left CESDA. And so again, 3 spots. We're looking for interested people, so please contact us if you're interested or you've known someone else. Just a reminder again, applications are due by mid-June, and then we'll hold the election in the latter half of June. Any questions? Yeah, Erica.
I should probably know this, but what is the process for selecting the chair of the executive board? That's elected by the members of the executive board once they're elected. Is that correct?
Yeah, both the
Whoever wasn't like there.
Maggie made a joke that whoever's there, whoever wasn't there that the day gets selected. But no, it just there's no. It's not.
Bill's the current chair.
Bill,
He's leaving. Right?
Yeah,
So you'll have to elect him.
Yeah, exactly. So Bill's the current chair. I believe in the bylaws it says every 2 years for both the executive board and the scientific board that they determine who they select, and they leave it up to the boards to do that. So,
And Bill's leaving because he's also changed his role at Roebuck, so,
That's right.
and Sizer, so. They've reorganized things there, so I think that's why we thought it was.
yeah, thank you. So any other questions or comments? All right.
Yeah, I would encourage people to consider, and they are responsible. They're not too onerous in terms of time. Like any organization, there as much as you make of it. But I would encourage people to consider, and if you are interested and want to make some formal inquiries, to speak to the current chairs of the committee if you want to get any more information.
Hilde, you want to?
Yes, I can just say that the sitting on the scientific board is a very interesting. And you learn a lot, and there are very good people and very nice people on the scientific board, and I think the contact with the working groups gives us a lot, and I would really recommend it. We work a lot. I cannot see that it is a small task, but it is more from kind of initiative, and that you get engaged, that you do more than just this only meeting. So yeah.
Okay. So the next item is the overview of the strategic plan. Bill has summarized the strategic plan into this one page, which is very, very helpful, because no one really likes reading strategic plans, even if they claim to do so. So the as you can see in the document, the priorities really are engaging with the community to understand their needs. And I know Barry's going to talk a bit about that this afternoon, later on this afternoon, around marketing discussion. Priority 2 is the organizational needs. That's really sort of structural things around whether we're have the right organization to meet the needs of the current and potentially future membership. And the third is what standards and products we need to provide and maintain, and how do these meet the needs of the existing membership and broader community and potential adoptees of our standards. I think one of the things on that third priority is obviously, since that strategic plan was originally written several years ago, there are now additional standards which we've taken on XCOS and SDTL, and CDI is up for public review, hopefully fairly soon, so that the prioritization has obviously become more complicated as we've got more standards. So if people have got any comments on the existing strategic plan, that would be helpful, because the executive board is going to really look at the strategic plan. I don't necessarily think that we're going to look at ripping it up and starting again by a long chalk, but I think just to look at finessing it and perhaps prioritizing within the existing framework. So any thoughts people have around that would be helpful now, or if you haven't got those thoughts immediately to hand, to contact someone on the executive board with those issues if you've got concerns or ideas or thoughts after the meeting today. So are there any questions, comments, or disagreements perhaps with the current strategic plan? Hilde.
Yeah, on the scientific board, we have worked a little on some recommendations for you. I sent you an email about that today, but you can look at it, and that will be shared also with the community later.
Okay.
So that's,
So coming up in the next section, yeah.
from our perspective, some of it, yes.
Okay.
Some of it, yes. With regards to the more scientific tasks will come up in the next section
Okay.
by
That'd
Darren.
be a good opportunity to discuss
Yes.
that later on. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay. So anything else? Anyone's immediate thoughts? I can't see anything on the. Can't see the chat. Oh, there's nothing. Hands up, chats, nothing. Anyone in the room?
So I would just say, this is like hats off to Bill for providing, sort of a one-page summary of that, and that's really useful. One thing that he did, which is nice, but also a little squishy, is we have 3 priorities and they're all questions. And actually, I think our priorities have to be statements. We do, right, like this is not just like our priority is engaging with the DDI community in order to understand the community's needs, right? And the organizational structures should, when we need to figure out we need to serve the organization structures and in order to achieve those things. And then I think the last part of it, and this is probably where it actually gets into some of the substance that intersects with the scientific committee, is that the standards and products that the Alliance provides and maintains should meet the needs of the Alliance and the broader community as articulated in priority 1, right? I mean, I don't want to wordsmith, but this is just kind of more of a, as we think about this, we should remember that these aren't questions, these are our goals.
So it's not a strategic plan, it's a strategic questionnaire.
We understand that, if I remember rightly. Christoph.
Yes, just an idea concerning the priority 1 DDI user community. I think it would be useful if we have a forum for the practitioners, because I think that we have a lot of working group for the beginners or for the experts in DDI, but for the average user of DDI. And I think it may lack something. And so if we have this kind of forum, and maybe we can identify some needs and maybe create some connection between this forum and the other working group. So this is a suggestion, one among other suggestions maybe, but it could be useful to have this kind of forum.
Thanks, Christoph.
Your glasses on.
Want me to read it?
Yes, please.
So Simon noted in the chat box, agree that priorities in the strategic plan should be statements. Our first priority is to ... Our second priority is to ... Then it looks like Wendy and Libby both put their thumbs up to what Maggie said.
Sorry, I don't know your name. Alicia.
To cover very well. I think what I missed is a priority related to working at the edges and outside the media community. I feel like just achieving that interoperability and not expanding necessarily, but connecting to what's up there.
Outreach. You talk about outreach. Is that a good way of saying that? Outreach.
Outreach.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
So are you saying, and I think this is actually an important strategic question, is the goal to encourage adoption and use of the standards that we have, or is it to encourage further development of the standards in order to achieve interoperability and have the standards be more interoperable? And they're both, good goals, and I think so this, but the question is priorities. And I wasn't sure what you were saying.
I think they're all important, but what I'm saying is specifically the second one. Yeah, that's. Yeah.
And
Hilde.
as we will show Darren later on today, you cannot separate those so much anymore, given the standards landscape as it is today. because reaching out and to new areas, and also that will also help the existing users of DDI as it is today. So it's a little different world, but we will talk more about that.
Okay, yeah, so that sounds like the meat of a discussion later on. I think that'd be useful. Okay, is anyone else in the room or virtually? Now I've got my glasses on, I can see what's going on virtually. Okay, back to Hilde and Darren. Six. Yeah.
Okay, could you bring that up, please, Jared? Updates. More time. Yeah, it'll be good since it develops like that. Mhm.
Just use that.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Now we will present an update about our thoughts about the scientific work plan from next year and onward. And I will go through mostly ideas that have been in the existing plan, and then I will move over to Darren, who will open up some of the new thoughts that will align very much with the discussion we just had, and then we will allow for a little discussion around that in the end. Yeah, the scientific work plan for 2024-26. It is one of our next major activities on the board. And the aim was actually to present it at this meeting, but we need some more time for the development, and we are scheduling it now to be released in autumn, this autumn, and to be voted for by the members before next year, so that when we start 2024, we will have the plan for that year in hand already. And this is basically a repetition from my last presentation, because we have a section 3 in the current plan, and some of the points from that we will continue into the next plan and discuss around is the development of implementation guides, and that needs to be done in collaboration with the TC and also with the other groups that develop products for us. And we will also look into standardized query and exchange protocol and what this means, and what can be done in relation to that. And then from section 5 in the current plan, that is a little more long-term and forward-looking, but we have this as a background for the new plan. And that is to evaluate the development work that has taken place and see if some of this can be used. What I put in blue here is really what we would prioritize, and that is guidelines and strategies to improve interoperability and also modularity of the products. And regarding interoperability, then there are two aspects, both on the more technical side and also collaboration with other metadata standards and communities. That will be also of our major goals. And engagement, we are looking into organization level relationships, for example, with the UNECE, and to continue that in the new plan. And also collaboration with organization with shared interests from us. And funding is always an issue. And we will look into that. We know it is a difficult topic, but we'll see what we can do there. And then I will move to Darren, who will really discuss a little about and present about some further ideas beyond what is in the existing plan.
Okay, thanks, Hilde. Okay, so the scientific board had a face-to-face meeting in Kua in September, and really what I want to talk about in the next few slides is just a kind of distillation of some of the key ideas that emerge from that. Now, none of these are necessarily correct ideas or ideas that we want to prescribe to the community, but we'd really like to explore where we are as the DDI Alliance in 2023. And I don't want to over dramatize this and say that we're at an inflection point, but we are kind of an inflection point now with engagement with wider cross-domain and interoperability issues. So we looked at some of the main kind of business context, I guess, the data landscape, some kind of big picture things. It's kind of becoming a cliche that we need to think more about global, interoperable, cross-domain data. There are various buzz phrases that are used in the UK. The government talks about collective intelligence, but you know, pick your buzz phrase. But essentially, the important principle is that we now need to make everything part of a bigger global data mesh wherever possible. Everyone kind of gets this and kind of understands it, but it's become obvious that it's a much harder problem than people originally anticipated. You know, when we look at things like the European Open Science Cloud or FAIR, these things are, you know, are successful in some areas, but they're not delivering necessarily on some of the initial promises that people were making 5 or 6 years ago. So we all acknowledge that we need to develop standards that have extension points, interoperability. This is a foundational precept almost. So that involves not only making sure that standards work together at a low technical level, but also increasing the engagement from the Alliance to the wider community. And that can happen at multiple levels with multiple audiences. So Arafan will talk later about DDI CDI, which is an attempt to address the cross-domain issue head-on. But broadly speaking, we need to slightly alter our mindset now to look at more generic ways, more modular ways of developing the standard. And as we go forward with the DDI Alliance, not only just looking at the holy trinity of codebook lifecycle and CDI, but also looking at supporting and ancillary products such as CVs, which enable reuse and interoperability. So I think where we are at the moment is we're reaching a level of maturity in the Alliance where we can start thinking about a DDI ecosystem in a more meaningful way with core products and supporting products as well. So FAIR, now FAIR represents an opportunity for the DDI Alliance to engage on not only a European level, but a kind of international level as well. The FAIR principles themselves are, as it says here, not new in essence, but they still largely remain principles. Now, I've been working with DDI for 10 or 11 years, and when I started at the archive, it seemed to me that DDI was one of those professionally designed and implemented standards that are around. And, you know, this is a personal opinion, but I think we probably don't leverage that enough in terms of how good and professional the standard is. Now, FAIR at the moment, as I say, is largely operating on a principles level, but there's a real opportunity, I think, within this new context of cross-domain interoperability to push DDI into that space, perhaps more than we traditionally have done in the past. DDI will always have its traditional core business of social sciences, but now we need to think about how we push that further into another level of market maturity, if you like, for want of a better phrase. Now, FAIR is going to be a great vehicle for us to enable that kind of promotion and engagement. FAIR, whatever you think of FAIR, and there are the various opinions on this, it is an absolute funding juggernaut that's now unstoppable. And so it's an important strategic thing that has to be engaged with for the DDI Alliance. Cross-domain FAIR, is obviously much more important, as I've said, in a new era of data integration and cross-domain research. So things like persistent identification, which have always been a core aspect of DDI, with URN and XML, are now becoming de rigueur in terms of, making sure that objects and digital objects are exchangeable. Now, I'm currently working on FAIR Impact, which is looking at persistent identification for sensitive data, persistent identification and versioning for complex data objects. Now, I'm doing that work with my colleague Hervé Lus at the archive at the moment, but there isn't really a DDI spin on this kind of thing at the moment. And that's such an obvious touch point for us. I can't help feeling that, with a little bit of more of a push, we could put DDI front and center of that, because, as I said, there is a level of maturity within DDI, which I don't always see in some other standards. So other key drivers and other things that are happening in the landscape, everyone is trying to join everything together, whether that's through the new fashion for knowledge graphs, which are very much in vogue, mega content aggregators. I'm thinking, particularly of CESDA and the CESDA data catalog, which does these things. Everyone is trying to join all sorts of data together, and people are finding out, as we have done in CESDA, and I'm not picking on CESDA, that this is a harder problem than we initially realized. So, more modular approaches, more generic modeling approaches are essential to make these things a reality. Now, I was talking to Arafan earlier about whether we need the obligatory ChatGPT slide, which feels necessary these days, but I haven't included one in this set of slides. But certainly artificial intelligence and machine learning are, we can't ignore them anymore. And I think the statement on here, more computing power requires more granular approaches, actually enables more granular approaches, and conversely, granular approaches require much more computing power. Now, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, and possibly longer, that computing power is now available at a cost that is not quite as prohibitive as it might have been, a decade ago. So I think looking at how we leverage those technologies in the context of DDI is going to be increasingly important. So coming on to RDF, and I am fully aware that not everyone is a fan of RDF, but it's still really the main mechanism for doing super granular data that's self-describing in easy to adopt or relatively easy to adopt interfaces. RDF sometimes gets a bad rap, because once you enter the RDF world as a newbie, you very quickly encounter the owl geeks, which puts a lot of people off immediately. But I think if you can get past the owl geeks, you'll find that RDF is actually a fairly simple and almost irreducibly beautiful way to model data. Okay, so I'm sure people will disagree with me, but I think DDI started as an XML standard, and there's good reasons for that, and there's good reasons to persist it as an XML standard, but we need to recognize now that there are other serializations. I'm recruiting new developers at the moment who've literally never worked with XML, and it's just show me the JSON. So, I mean, these are things that we need to embrace, more fully, not just on a policy level, but, technically. And I know in the TC, we're doing work to make sure that future iterations will be, have RDF serializations as standard, particularly JSON LD. So in order for metadata to be useful in the future, it needs to have a high level of granularity, a high level of abstraction and implementation level, and should be able to have extension points into different types of data, so going beyond the traditional core base of social science. So in terms of practical things that we can do in the next 2 years, and we're thinking really about the scientific work plan up to 2026, we need to better describe the focus and purpose of each individual product. As I say, DDI products have reached a level of maturity now that we can think about a suite in the way, you know, I mean, this is a little bit frivolous, but in the way you look at Office as a suite of products, as a unified suite of products, that can be applied at the branding level, at the technical level. But, you know, we have a rich ecosystem now that we can explain to the community that there are different audiences, different use cases that can really benefit from each one of those. We need to describe how DDI products can be used together. At the archive, we're implementing CDI, but that has a particular focus on structural data interoperability. We can't mark up questions in CDI, nor would we want to. So we will use a hybrid of lifecycle and CDI to achieve our purposes. But I think more guidance, more explanation how you don't have to choose codebook or lifecycle or CDI. You know, you can benefit from leveraging the best aspects of all of those. We need to create better guidelines related to DDI within, as I just said, within those products, and also, you know, how you might use DDI in conjunction with schema.org or DCAT. You know, why reinvent the wheel when you can, you know, there's a perfectly good conceptual modeling standard with SCOS, which obviously won't solve all use cases, but it's how you position DDI in that richer landscape. You know, DDI can't solve all problems, and nor should it, but explain, you know, what that ecosystem looks like for a modern data repository. So modeling approaches are being adopted within DDI now. So we have a common set of UML modeling practices. So DDI becomes almost an abstraction, and then we serialize it out into either XML or RDF, or in future that may be kind of R or Python classes. So that's almost looking at DDI as a higher level model in the future is definitely a way forward, especially when it comes to interoperability with other models. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about external engagement as well, and with other standards bodies. Now, DDI is a kind of rich set of standards now, but in order to really leverage that in the future, it's not a merely technical problem. I think it's fair to say that CoData's sponsorship of CDI has been massively beneficial to pushing this over the line and getting this over to the first release, engaging with a much wider community of potential adopters. So I think we need to look at ways as to how we really engage with different standards bodies. I mean, speaking within the UK, ONS, the Office for National Statistics, doesn't really use DDI lifecycle at the moment. I don't think, John, that's going to happen anytime soon. But it's they don't use any yeah, they don't use, well, yeah, they don't use any standards. But you know, there's an example there where it's not a saturated market for the DDI Alliance. You know, there's still, you know, quite large acres of opportunity where DDI isn't being used and potentially could be used. So we need to look at, you know, what really is a kind of stakeholder engagement strategy. I think we're all a community and we're all friends and we all have our own personal contact bases, but a more kind of structured and formal stakeholder engagement strategy is something we need to develop in the next couple of years. So I think the primary focus of the DDI Alliance, yeah, I mean, as it says here, has been on structural standards, and you know that will continue to be an important role. But yeah, that wider engagement with the wider standards landscape is going to be really, really important, and particularly using FAIR as a vehicle to push DDI out further. So finally, these aren't prescriptions. I'd like to open this up, you know, for debate, because this is a community, and people's ideas about what DDI just needs to do even in the highest big picture sense is really important. But you know, if we had to distill this from our thoughts from KUR, you know, the main points are, you know, we need to focus on development of representation languages or technical serializations, take your pick, beyond XML. Now that work is already happening, but I mean, if we produced Python classes for DDI, I mean, are people going to use them? Our instinct is yes, but we need to hear from the community as to what you need. We don't think you're going to need a serialization in. I can't think of a good example at the moment. Think of an obscure serialization, somebody, but Rust, for instance. Yes, we don't think, but if there's no Rust, and there's going to be no Rust, not anytime soon anyway. But yeah, as I say, we need to hear from the community about the things that you actually need and for us to focus on. So XML will always be there as the core standard, but yes, JSON LD. But what other things does the community need? We will develop further abstractions on the modeling. There's a subset of UML that has been developed, which allows us to have a very, very generic and abstract model of DDI and for all flavors of DDI in the future. We also need to identify requirements better, starting from the initiation of a new product through the entire product life cycle. Now, the TC does oversees this very well at the moment, but we are looking to formalize and make more robust a kind of more formal DevOps pipeline, if you like, that reflects modern practices. I've mentioned creating more guidelines for the use of DDI specifications and mappings between the products, and also I'm not sure I know what this is. Express mapping, is that?
Yeah, no, it is just what you need to.
So I was thinking express mapping, as in press a porte. Okay, so
it needs to happen at the level of the model.
Yes. So sorry. Yeah. So it's express. Express here is a verb rather than adjective, which slightly threw me. So yes. So okay. Yeah. So yes, we need to express mapping at the model level, at the representation level. And finally, an exhortation from someone who's deeply cynical normally, but let's do it together. Okay.
There's some comments there in the.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Darren.
You're welcome.
So there's just a few comments. Oh, it looks like just Leanne, said I'm going to leave. We organized an international conference on metadata in April 24th in Paris. Cosmos 2024. And then Christoph also said he'd have to leave.
But yes. But sometimes it's simple as just rocking up to these things and doing presentation, doing more webinars. It's not kind of MBA level type stuff. It's really just sitting there, presenting it, explaining in simple terms why it works.
I just wanted to back up the comment Christoph made that I'm on the organizing committee for the Cosmos conference. It's an official statistics event, but they're looking a little more broadly and including sort of open science, and that it's really about the future of metadata management in official statistics. It looks like they're really into a thing they call smart metadata, which is, I don't know if that's good marketing or bad marketing, but they're going to be putting out a call for papers, and they've written a sort of manifesto thing that you may have seen.
But yeah, about 5 years ago, smart data was the buzz phrase du jour.
How did that work?
Well, it got replaced by frictionless data shortly afterwards. So
we need a frictionless.
Yeah, frictionless metadata will be coming soon to a store near you.
But talking about the Cosmos conference, it is for statistical agencies, but they will be focusing on exactly the same topics as we were mentioning today, and that has been developed a little independently.
I think they'll be pretty open in how they're looking at that.
Yeah, but the same topics. And that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But people should pay attention to that. Looks like it'll be.
All right, let's exit this. Looking at the agenda.
Do we want to break and then should we want to come back to it? We'll have a break until 15:45. Well, let's come back 5 minutes early.
Okay, so we'll start our break now and we'll come back at 14:45. So start our next session 5 minutes earlier than what's on the schedule. So 14:45. Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Okay, hello, can people hear us? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Right, so the next section's on the working group feedback highlights. We've got sort of 45 minutes for this, so we want to give as much time as possible for people to ask questions and add comments. So I've asked each speaker to not speak more than 5 minutes. It's going to be a bit of a shuffling here because we all just have to get around the laptop, so people will be coming in and out over the next 25 minutes, half an hour. So if you bear with us while we shuffle people around between the reports, that'll be helpful. And just a reminder before, if you keep your microphones muted if you're online, raise your hand or put something in the chat if you want to say something, and Jared is managing to keep an eye on what's going on, so hopefully we won't miss you if you've got some comments or want to ask a question. Okay, so Darren, do you want to start with an overview, your perspective?
Yeah, over the last few weeks, Hilde and I have been collating a number of reports from the various working groups. Now, we've talked a lot about the scientific board up until now and referenced the executive board, but really the working groups within the DDI Alliance are the engine of kind of productivity and getting things done. So we're going to have a number of kind of short presentations from 4 of the working groups. I'll give a brief synopsis from the CV and training and SDTL working groups who weren't able to be here. But the first to tee up is going to be Wendy Thomas, who's going to brief you on the work of the technical committee.
Okay, let's see if I can get this up and sharing. Is this coming through?
Yeah.
It should be going to a slideshow soon.
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, it's not on mine either, so it doesn't. I know. Just a second. There we go. Okay. Very quickly, because a lot of this was covered in the scientific board group, because a lot of the work that the technical committee does is there to support the work of the board and the overall alliance. But we have both our ongoing responsibilities and then we have longer range support goals. The ongoing things include the review and publication for new accesses, new products, new versions. So that whole process of getting individual products ready for review, ready for a vote and out the door. And over this past year, as mentioned earlier in the scientific board report, we also have added some processes for publishing out official technical materials like best practices, et cetera. But in addition, the technical committee has a broader focus and something that we're looking at, particularly over the next few years, is in the areas of product production, development organization, and the product mix of the DDI suite. Over the past few years, it moved from kind of that monolithic, here is a DDI product, which is what the original technical committee was dealing with, to a suite of to 2 products and then really a suite of products. And so aligning those products and making sure that things are working together and things are following the same guidelines becomes very important for the technical committee to focus on and help organize in order for us to be able to do our job of review and publication. Production, the goals for the product productions are really to ensure that long-term maintenance and support for DDI products. We don't want to have a product out there that we are saying, oh, well, you are now on your own. There are levels of maintenance and levels of support that need to be provided if you're a public standards body that is publishing more official for more official standards. We also want to make it easy for new development by providing better access to the development processes. In the past, as everyone knows, it's been a very handcrafted product and set of products. And so we have been moving over the past few years of automating more of these things and moving them into production processes that not only allow those of us who are working on them directly to have better access and better work conditions, but also for better access by those people who are developing and testing and reviewing those products. In line with this, and particularly as we move towards some more technical means of managing content control and production of implementation languages, which we want to expand. We need to manage those production costs, both the technical support, but also very much so people's contributed time. Our old processes really sucked up individual contribution time, and we really want to make sure we're getting better bang for our buck and that individuals are getting a more satisfactory return on their contributed time. The DDI suite development obviously is really to clarify what is DDI, what does it cover, and then how those products fit into it and what sections of DDI they cover, and how those support a range of applications and various uses of the metadata. And finally, the whole suite organization and the product mix. We want to be able to say when new products come along, is SDTL, it is XCOS, and is CDI has just been handed over to TC. Sorry for stealing your thunder, Arafan. We want to make sure that those products fit within kind of an overall mix of what DDI is trying to accomplish. And so that you don't have a bag of individual products, but you do have a suite of products that are intended to work together. Specifically, some of the things that we're focusing on in the next year are the technical product alignment. We're not production alignment. We're not trying to dictate to individual projects how they do things. But if you think of it more in terms of the GSBPM model of here are activities that need to take place and different products will do them in different ways or maybe use different tools. But we need to make sure that the boxes are checked off, that certain work is getting done in the production and that certain assurances for involvement of the community take place. And one of the big benefits of that is really opening up development to a broader group of users and implementers. It not only helps them come into the development by being able to contribute individually and test things out. It means that we can actually go out and test small pieces and small areas of development work as they come along and fine tune them at that point, rather than having to wait until we have a number of items, do a big bang production, and people are trying to figure out what was done across a wide range of implementation options. Once again, obviously you need the auto production in order to support that multiple implementation languages, not in just those we select initially, but in the long term as new languages come along. If you've got a core set of information that is then scripted out into implementation languages and in a consistent way, we can actually support a broader set of implementation languages that parallel each other. In terms of production costs, obviously the first one in terms of technical support and contributed time, one of the things we're looking at this year is what type of maintenance is needed for the technical systems that we do and software systems that we do supported either through an outside organization such as Collectica or some things we have at the UKDA, but also just more broadly in terms of making sure that we can do fixes when we need them, that we do have standard maintenance set up for those. As I stated earlier, the more bang for your contributed time, I mean, less slog work, because from those of us who have been writing XML by hand for 20 years, believe me, there's a lot of slog. And then looking at the production management over time and really capturing and maintaining that production processing infrastructure and production steps. And one of the things that we've implemented with the CDI is when they pass over, as they pass over this new product for a vote and review, that we also have information on how that product is maintained and what their production process is so that it can be maintained long term. Suite development, these are pretty self-explanatory. We're looking at the individual products and their overall coverage, coordination of content from working groups. This is one shift that we're really looking at, is that as new coverage areas come up, that we look at them in terms of what the requirements are and what the needs are in terms of the metadata, and then look at how they are distributed across the various products in the suite, where they belong and how they should be implemented, so that they can work well together over time, and that you're not doing our old model of something comes up in life cycle, oh, it should be in codebook, oh, CDI is interested in it, and so it kind of is this piecework development and very little parallel processing. We're trying to get that tighter and have better alignment between our products. And to do part of this, the technical committee is really looking at, rather than being seen as they're the life cycle and codebook group, is that as new products or new versions of those products come out, that we spin off a shorter term working group that focuses on, say, a new version of codebook or a new version of life cycle. It allows us to do explicitly what we have been doing internally within the technical committee, where members are really focusing on and coming in for those areas that are of interest to them and of interest to their organizations. The suite organization development is, we were looking at moving that DDI profile mechanism out of into a standalone product from lifecycle, making sure that it's available for all of our XML, for all the XML expressions of products, because it's usable that way. There's no reason for it to be residing solely in lifecycle. And along with that, looking at seeing if there are other products that could facilitate the use or management of DDI products that would work cross-product, just in terms of our overall product mix. So my last comment is stay involved and stay informed. We, like all the other committees, are always looking for new members. We've had a few this year. One of those we lost again due to a job change, but we're always interested in new members. And also just joining the DDI SRG group list. It's a way to keep informed on the discussion. I'd say only a third of the members, people on that list, are actually actively involved in the technical committee or CDI or other specific development work. They're there because they want to know what's being talked about, so they can raise questions or become involved themselves as something comes up and is of interest to them. That was it. Did I stay under my 5 minutes? No.
Yeah, pretty much, Wendy. So, but yeah, thanks for that, Wendy. Yeah, and if I can second the point about new members are always being welcome. I sit on TC. You don't need to have any special postdoc qualifications or anything, just enthusiasm and willingness to engage with DDI. So yeah, it's not a special club. So if you want to be involved, just get involved and send an email to Wendy or anyone else on the scientific board, and new members are always welcome and encouraged to join. Okay, so are there any questions from anyone about Wendy's presentation or any of the points she's raised?
Not a question. I would like just to thank Wendy for all of the great work you're doing, Wendy, with the TC and with everybody else involved.
On behalf of the TC, we thank you.
Okay, so if we don't have any questions, Arafan's going to do. Yeah, Arafan Gregory is going to do 5 minutes on DDI, CDI.
So I'll try to keep this quick. That way. Which one? There we go. So I have an announcement to make. There were people who said back in the day that nothing would ever come out of DDI4 moving forward, and they were lying. They also said, a lot of the same people, that we didn't need a replacement for DDI lifecycle, and they weren't lying, they were right. And so what we completed as of last Friday, and Wendy did steal my thunder, but not very much, so not too bad, Wendy. We turned over from the CDI working group, we sent to John and Wendy as the chairs of TC, the finished release candidate specification 1.0, which is the first new model-driven product based on that modeling that started low these many years ago. And so that's a huge achievement, I think. And the group has worked hard for years reading. So TC's now gonna perform quality assurance and so on, and there will be issues, I'm sure, and we'll deal with those. I think we have a webinar or some similar activities planned to inform the community prior to an approval vote. Hopefully this will be good enough to go straight to vote, and then we'll have a membership ballot and it will be a new product. So we're going to follow the process, and hopefully that will happen soon. If you don't know this already, it basically covers a bunch of new data types with the idea that you can describe data that isn't the traditional wide social, behavioral, economic data, but bring it into the same systems and integrate it. And the other piece of that is being able to describe data lineage through describing processes. So what were all the different formats and things, the different data sources that went into what processing, where's the code, how does it fit together to produce the data you're looking at? And that is something that we'll talk about in a minute, but basically it's a complement to DDI's codebook and lifecycle. And as it happens, other standards, because the emphasis is on cross-domain. We have today a bunch of different syntax representations, XML, Turtle, JSON LD. There will be others. Big emphasis on machine actionability and granularity. So this is in line with a lot of the stuff that you heard Darren talking about earlier. We've had some significant early implementations. UKDA has wide, long, and multidimensional, right, Darren, right now, those three? And then at SICT, there's an implementation of the process model working with the European Social Survey, and then climate and environmental data from other sources, and some things like population density from Eurostat and geospatial stuff. That is actually using DDI lifecycle to describe the main data set, European Social Survey, and the process piece is being done in CDI. And the implementation of those two works because they were designed to work together. So it's actually been incredibly easy. They're using Collectica with lifecycle, and we're adding a piece on. And we were very happy with that. There've been some other implementations. BLS is doing the indicators and some other ones. I don't need to talk about that so much now. Our next steps are very much focusing on implementation support. Once that 1.0 spec is out, it will have problems, but it needs to get implemented to find the issues so we can solve them. So we're shifting gears into doing examples and use cases, doing community implementation guides. That was something we started a while ago, sort of held back on, and we're going to be pushing ahead again with that. Looking at new syntax representations, Python, R, GraphQL. We're not sure what they will all be at this point, but definitely some new syntaxes, software for people who are adopting the standard, and importantly, some white papers that position CDI in terms of other DDI standards and in terms of other external standards, because there's a lot of stuff out there, especially around FAIR and CDI. People have to understand what it's good for, and it doesn't do everything. We have new members. We have a person from SICT, some people from UKDA, a couple of other people who've said they'd like to join. So we're getting new members now that the standard is coming out and all the hard work is done. Gee, thanks, guys. No, we're actually really happy to have new members. And we have a couple of face-to-face meetings coming up, one in Dagstuhl in September. And as we have open seats, we will fill them from anybody who applies. We'll pick from that pool. And Jared put out an announcement recently about that. And then we'll have a meeting either in the margins of Eddie or an RDA plenary in March. I'm not sure, but we're going to have 2 face-to-face meetings next year. Couple of general comments. Darren mentioned the cross-domain interoperability framework. The cross-domain FAIR community has picked up on what we're doing, largely because CoData is a big proponent of that. I think we're going to get some new users from that. We have interest from things like EOSC Futures, which is where that SICK project is going on. Some of the FAIR impact groups are interested. And I think we will see adoption in a pretty new community to us as a result of this. I'm very hopeful. There's been a lot of buzz around this. And I think that's great. I think it's kind of forward and outward looking. My last comment is this, that the Alliance has been going slowly but slowly becoming more mature as an organization. The experience of the DDI CDI working group has actually benefited directly from that. And I mean directly. Having Wendy sit in the group as a liaison to TC means that we get much, much better coordination. We're more consistent. The processes are clear. We ask the question, we get an answer. And that's across the board with training, with marketing. And I feel like the level of coordination across groups in the Alliance is noticeably better than it was several years ago. So I just want to say that was the experience we had. So I think the direction we're heading in with the process is very good. Also, we have liaison with external standards groups like W3C, DCAT, schema.org, again, through CDI, because we're not just talking as organizations, we're working on user requirements and projects. And I think both those levels are important, and that's come out of CDI. And then Darren made me do an obligatory chat GPT slide. So I wrote a haiku. And there it is. And if you want to know what that thing really is, let me get rid of this nonsense over here because the picture's really important here, Sanda. Oops. Where is it? What good is a joke that you can't see, huh? There, does that help? There. It's a chat GPT narwhal. So what I'm gonna, on that happy note, I'm gonna leave you to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Moving the way to the TC. Well done.
Okay, so did anyone have any follow-up questions there for
So, Erica, you turned out to the glossary.
Oh, yes.
Narwhal.
Narwhal, exactly.
All right, so next we have Dan Gilman, who's been instructed strictly to speak for 5 minutes on the glossary working group.
There must be a history behind it, but I'm not sure what it is.
No, everyone's been treated exactly quite equally. There's no favors.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm the chair of the glossary group, and I'm going to give an update about what we're up to. So, well, let's see if I can figure out how to page down. Let's see. No, that's not working. Yeah, so put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, there you go. That should work.
All right, so let's see.
Just go back. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so here's the current group. There are 6 current active members, and I also listed Hilde, who's the liaison from the scientific board. The roster has changed over time, but we have good attendance and commitment to the work. A little bit about the history. The working group began in late 2021. We work online remotely. The group originally had about 9 members, but back then not everyone was active. We recruited, and so we currently have these 6 that I listed. And that's enough to get the work done, but we're always looking for more people. We need a wide variety because we need the different opinions to make progress and achieve our, let's see what's happened to this. Can I close that? So to achieve quality. And as I said before, the current group is very dedicated to the work. So now what happened? Oops. So our meeting schedule, we use the DDI Zoom account. Until about a month ago, we were meeting every 2 weeks, but we thought that we needed to increase the pace of progress, so we've been meeting weekly. Essentially, the meetings are devoted to defining terms, and our decision-making process is by consensus. We never have to resort to a vote, but this means that progress is deliberate. Part of that is that we have an aim to have high quality. We include terms that are appropriate for understanding DDI products. So, but it turns out that creating definitions is hard because, well, each person thinks that he or she has their own idea about the meaning of a term. But the problem is getting everybody to agree on a single way is sometimes pretty time consuming. And sometimes there's several senses of a term that are important to distinguish. An example is code book, because there's the DDI code book standard, there's a conforming instance to that standard, and there's the general idea of what a code book means. And so the glossary contains an entry for all three of those. We follow an ISO standard, ISO 704, which is called Principles and Methods of Terminology. We use the 2000 edition of the standard because it's freely available on the web. And among the principles that we apply to writing definitions are we avoid circularity and we use the principle of substitution. The principle of substitution says that you can take the definition and substitute it for the term in a sentence in which it's used, and the meaning of the sentence doesn't change. So a little bit about our progress. We started with the terms in the existing DDI glossary, and I have a link to that because that page still exists. That had 64 terms in it originally, but some were rejected as being out of scope because they didn't really address the concerns of understanding DDI. The current work's conducted in a Confluence website. I've got the link to that. We've currently defined 72 terms. We have 15 left, and so we're expecting to be able to complete the first draft in July. So like I say, finishing the first draft in July, at that time we'll conduct an internal review of the working group and get an informal review from some outside people, incorporate changes as needed, and then send the draft to the scientific board for a formal review. Then we'll have to resolve comments and return this to the board for publication. Plan to work with Alliance web developers to build an official site, but at that point, we will consider ways of enhancing this. And there are a number of possibilities, but we'll have to see how that goes. And that's it for me. Anyone have any questions? And John is very happy. Oh, and I forgot to mention that, yes, we have a new word to define in the glossary, narwhal.
Okay.
All right, many thanks. Chat messages. Nope. Okay. All right. So that was perfect. Okay.
And thank you very much for all of your great work done.
Thank
Much
you.
appreciated by everybody.
We appreciate.
Thank you. And for initiating also the time. Not also.
Yeah.
So she could hear. Complicated, but as Darren knows, I was recently in a discussion about people who were really interested in languages, not computer languages, but spoken languages. And I know Chesta has something like this, and I was wondering if you guys have talked about this at all for things that are not in English.
Well, some members of the group are more than monolingual.
So
And
they're not.
I think that there could be the possibility of that. I haven't heard of a call for that. On the other hand, the glossary is not published yet.
Yeah.
And so I
Well,
think there's a pretty good probability that once it gets up there, people are gonna say, well, look, we need this in French. And
We've done training materials in French.
Yeah.
And Spanish,
Yeah,
so
so-
some of the same people are involved in that.
and so I think it would be fine to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I have other than the fact that I don't speak French, I think, it's a great idea.
no, it's always good to suggest things that are lots of work for somebody else.
Right.
That's what.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, but so this suggestion, by the way, didn't come from somebody in the DDI or my data community at all. It was people working on education videos in which their children who are speaking obviously in their native languages. And I guess OECD and other organizations have done these studies in which they collected data across lots of different countries. And they really would like to be able to have standardized metadata that allows people to work with the data across languages. So that anyway, there's some people.
It's a great idea, as.
So people got-
said.
But I think people online can't hear this conversation, so.
Sorry.
So there was a bit of conversation about the need to translate some of the glossary terms into other languages. Nothing.
And I do think that there are user communities that are not sort of embedded in the metadata community that are doing research across countries. And I would actually, we've been working with ESS already, so I'm sure that they do this, right? But I think that those research organizations would be very interested in perhaps collaborating with us around this. You're shaking your head, not ESS.
No, they're using it English, but of course the questionnaires are developed and translated nationally because they have to,
Yeah.
they will be fitted in those languages. But I don't think it is a great idea especially to translate class names and things like that. I think they should be standardized. If you should translate, it should be limited at least to the definitions.
The definitions.
Yes.
That's
Never,
what glossary is.
never the class names or the element names.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief update on the work of the CV and training group and SDTL. That's not a slight on George, but that was omitted from the agenda. I want to give Ingo adequate time at the end to talk about the developers group. So I'll give you the highlights here, and the link to the full report will be sent out. Okay, so for the CV working group, there have been a number of developments in terms of the versioning and deprecation policy, so that the level of maturity now CVs within DDI is increasing. I think, as I alluded to earlier, using CVs and common CVs is one of the simplest stratagems you can deploy for interoperability. So there's quite a bit of work going on at the moment from a content and technical level. Persistent identifiers are now being implemented at code level or at concept level if you occupy a SCOS universe, whereas traditionally in DDI, you just address the control vocabulary. So going forward, we'll be able to address an individual concept and individual versions of the concept. So again, on the principle of granularity, making great progress on that. Communication channels with CESDA have improved a lot, thanks to Maya Dolinar, who's now coordinating activities between the DDI Alliance and CESDA to move us forward with the RDF platform that will be going to production in the next couple of months. So that's all looking very positive for the CV working group. Also, CV pages will be updated on the DDI Alliance website. A number of you noticed that some of those are looking a little bit stale now. So as part of the launch of the RDF platform, those will be updated as well to reflect the new content. Okay, so moving on to the SDTL working group, an update from George Alter. There's a number of changes happening to SDTL, structured data transformation language, for those of you not terribly familiar with it. There's a new RDF specification called SDTH, Structured Data Transformation History, which, as well as allowing you to use machine actionable language to describe transformations, will now allow you to do prov-style queries on the provenance of those transformations. So SDTL version 2 will incorporate SDTH, and that's going to be submitted for approval, I think later in the year, to the technical committee, I believe. So looking at the training group as well, just on the work they've been doing, 8 webinars were conducted between March and May this year. So those have been very well attended, typically between 30 and 80 people, and the satisfaction surveys have been coming back really positively. So there'll be a number of other events coming this year. There's a temporary working group, which I believe you're chairing, Arafan, to improve the kind of slide decks and obviously look at the DDI Alliance website to improve the signposting and how the content and the navigation are working there. So monthly meetings are now being held on that basis. Going forward, there are a number of new slide decks being prepared. Some of these have been translated into French as well, so bon appetit. And over the next year, there's another couple of webinars to be completed before the end of 2023. And the Train the Trainer workshop at Dagston in 2018 recommended that we should finalise a number of training materials, and that's going to be completed this year as well. So that was a whistle-stop tour of 3 working groups, and I'd like to hand over to Ingo, who'll talk about the newly reinvigorated developers group and what they've been doing.
Thank you very much to the training group and
Yes, yeah.
and Jennifer here. She is chairing a subgroup of the training groups,
Yeah.
the training opportunity group, and you are welcoming members also to do DDI trainings and taking part in webinars. And yeah. Thank you.
So, hello also from my side. I'm Hilde. I'm one of the 3 chairs of the DDI developers group. You will later see why it's 3 chairs. And also maybe to start, maybe to give some history for people who don't know that. There used to be a DDI developers group. The DDI developers group is the newest group of the DDI Alliance, the newest working group, because we exist now for 6 weeks. So progress report about the working group, thank you, is therefore a little bit arbitrary because we have our first meeting next week. So there is not that, so report over. No, but maybe to give some history, there used to be a DDI developers group. It was an informal group which existed from perhaps 2009 to 2014 before it collapsed. It collapsed because nobody wanted to chair it. People had problems finding the time to participate because developers are always in high demand. They normally get overtime in their own organization, and the development work has to be done mostly in their holidays and free time. So this is most likely investment. And also the question if this should become a working group, because some people were against that, and also this gave some tension within the group. But so the idea was to reestablish this developer group, and we did that by having a hackathon. To give you a little bit of definition what a hackathon is. A hackathon is basically a free software development event where people come together for 2 days, can pick tasks from a list of suggestions, and can basically produce prototypes or proof of concepts in those times. The whole thing should be done in a way that this can be solved within this time frame. So we had our first hackathon in Gothenburg in March. It was supported by SND, the Swedish National Data Service, DDI Alliance, and my university. We had originally about 20 participants, but some got stuck due to strikes, for example, in Paris. And one of the participants missed the plane. And at the end, we have 13 people in Gothenburg and 3 people remotely in Paris. And those people divided into 5 groups and basically produced the following outcomes as proofs of concept: a DDI codebook to DDI CDI converter using XLSTs, the methods of representing DDI lifecycle in GraphQL based on a DDI-L example from ICPSR. We have now a reworked version for the DDI codebook to PDF converter. This is a project that I found highly interesting because this project is 7 years old, was in the tools section of the website, and was based on old Nesta structures. And this has now been lifted up to 2.5 and integrated into Dataverse. Then we have a machine actionable DMP RDA to codebook mapper. It works at the moment only unidirectional. The goal is to have it bidirectional in due time. And last but not least, we have Java classes from DDI lifecycle XSD sources. REST API basing on the Spring framework from the remote group who produced that in Paris. Actually, we wanted to vote a winner, but the 5 projects were so good we could not really elect a winner. So it was a fantastic event, thanks to SMD again. And also the result of it was that we were able to recreate the DDI developers group as a DDI working group. So this is the goals that we have. We want to have these hackathons yearly. We meet every 4 to 6 weeks. We basically improve the tools catalog. And also we want, again, with this no tools, no standard session, we want to show new tools at Eddy and iAssist. This is the new group. As I told earlier, we had a chair problem. So we split now the chair role into 3 persons. And also, I find it quite successful for a very new group that it starts now with 14 people, plus we have 2 or 3 in the pipeline. So I can already announce that there will be the next hackathon in Cologne in May 2024. We already have the budget, thank you, to the executive board. And also we are, like everybody, looking for new members. And the right side shows something, shows 2 things that might inspire people. The hackathons have their own DDI beer. This is the DDI IPA that we did last time. And it also shows you, if you read the text below, that beer can be described in DDI. Thank you.
Thank you so much for initiating this, Ingo.
We need to add the term beer to
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Ingo. And if I can second the no tools, no standards, it's so important to get developers involved in building real tools because this helps lower the bar to entry into DDI for a lot of communities. So I'll second the appeal that I've already made. If you want to get involved in the DDI developers group, you know, there are lots of developers out there who I'm sure could contribute, you know, all welcome.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a hand that's raised.
Yep.
From me.
Yeah, one, I did put a note in the chat about XCOS, the work that they're doing this year. But I also wanted to note with the developers group, one of the really cool things about this is their hackathons, they collect ideas from the community of ideas that you think would be good. Obviously, in a hackathon, the developers select their own set of products and things that they want to work on, but they've made it easy to interject and to raise some needs for tools as from the community, which is really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, the problem is, or actually the advantage of a hackathon is that people can pick topics freely. So we had 8 suggestions, and at the end, 4 of them were worked on, and 1 of them was actually something that the hackers themselves came up during the hackathon. So if we have suggestions, they might be picked up, but we cannot really guarantee it. That's always because we don't want to force the developers to do anything, because they have that often enough in their life that there is a IT project manager who tells them you have to do this and that. Here they can do everything freely and can say, this is what we want to do.
And yeah, and my point was totally is that it gives an opportunity to the community to identify things that they see, that even if it's not done by the developers group, it becomes more broadly known. If there's things that you're not picking up that, say, technical committee or other people, this needs to be worked on, or there seems to be a need for this, it can get passed on to other other people. So
yes,
it's a good input point for the community.
okay, thanks again.
Yeah, and a big thank you to all our working groups.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much to all of the working groups. The work you're doing is really what makes the Alliance move forward and develop and increase its position in the standards landscape. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Next up, we've got Jared, who's going to do the financial report and then talk about the budget requests and some other thoughts.
Yeah, great, thanks. So each year we present a report on how the past fiscal year went. Our fiscal year runs from July through June, as well as talk about funding for the upcoming year. This is a snapshot of this current fiscal year. You have what was budgeted, approved in the budget on that left column. And then in the forecast is what we forecast will be the final end of year outcome come end of June. And you can see roughly between 60 and 70% of what we had allocated will be spent by the end of the year. I think a lot of that still has to do with travel. We're on the tail end of that COVID travel. We're seeing more travel actually going through this year compared with the previous years. And then sometimes groups are requesting funding and not spending it all out. So overall, we're looking healthy, continuing to look healthy. Our ending fund balance, our reserves are well over about 340,000 at the end of the year, US dollars. And then you can just see broken out by the individual groups that requested funding, how much of that was spent. So any questions about this past fiscal year? Okay. We'll go to, and there are links there to more detailed information. So for this upcoming fiscal year, just to remind everyone of the process, anyone in the community could submit a funding request. The call went out in March, and those were submitted, and then the scientific board evaluated requests related to scientific and technical activities and provided that feedback and input to the executive board chair and vice chair. And then the executive board met earlier this month, and happy to say that they reviewed and approved those requests. There's a link there to the individual approved requests, as well as what was submitted, including links out to the very, very specific details. Overall, $178,000 worth of requests were approved, with a projected revenue of half of that. And so there's an expected loss, just like in previous years. And the executive board has discussed that about operating in a deficit, and discussed how, like I mentioned, in the past few fiscal years, not everything has been spent. And so they're paying a close attention to that. But if everything is spent out, then the forecast reserves balance will be down to 256,000 estimated US dollars. So just wanted to give an overview. Again, this links out to the detailed what was approved, but an overview of what has been approved for this upcoming year. And we talked about strategic plans, and really these are kind of what the priorities of the alliances for this upcoming year, what is funded. And so the technical committee, you have a technical committee in-person meeting, administrative data workshop in collaboration with Closer, and then funding for infrastructure support. There is work with the DDI CDA working group, syntax representations, and an external facing face-to-face event. For the training working group, there's funding for 2 workshops, discount waiver workshop fees for DDI members, and then continuing in the webinar series. For Dogstool, there's a couple workshops that funding is to support. And then at the end here, continuing with the hackathon, funding of the hackathon working group in Cologne, the scientific board for an in-person meeting in Norway. And then lastly, the DDI website, which is run out of ICPSR, there needs to be a migration due to staffing and technology issues. So refreshing of or migrating of the website, some refreshing. So that's the update for this past year as well as upcoming year, what's been approved. Any questions?
If I hadn't been part of the people who have approved this, I would say, should we line this up next to the things that we said were our strategic priorities and see if they line up? Now, since I already voted on this, I feel like that's not really my place to say that, but I think that that's what this organization, this meeting should do.
At least maybe you took part in the executive board meeting where you evaluated.
Oh, yeah, no, I already had my say.
And then we on the scientific board, when we put up the priorities with our comments and with our priorities, we make sure that everything we support are in line with the scientific work plan. And that, again, is taking points from the strategic plan into an implementation level. So if you take that line in between, it has been covered that way. And then you can again, when you evaluate it, like next time, you can look into how it is from your perspective. But this way, it has been taken care of from the scientific board.
Yeah, no, I think that the notes, the things that the scientific board gave us for the recommendation were really useful, and that's why we actually, we were very strong. We supported, thinking about how we had listed those priorities. I think that we have got priorities 2 and 3, but I don't know that we put any money into priority 1. And so I think everything that we did is a priority, but I don't think that necessarily means we've covered our priorities. And it wasn't until I saw them juxtaposed like this, I thought, oh, so we need to, and maybe it's because Barry's here and he has, it was like making sure that we are kind of focused on those users and what is it that we're doing for that as well. So I'm not questioning anything but everything, I think everything that we put money into is part of our priorities, but I do think that we are still missing that first priority in terms of making sure that we are, readily always engaging and listening to our members and our users. I actually, a related note that I made when we were talking about whatever we call George's thing, SDTL, is do we know, I was thinking about SDTL, do we know how many people or how many organizations are using it? And I thought, do we know that about any of our standards? No. Oh, very, very.
I was just going to say, this is like a nice segue into what I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
Particularly the assessment chart.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Okay, yeah. So those are all questions we can talk about there, but yeah.
Just on that one, we have got a map on the website, but I noticed hadn't actually been updated since
I think nearly up to a decade since the last time it was updated. And actually, one of the things that is really remarkable, just anecdotally looking at it, is the increase in adoption. over the last 10 years, it's been quite significant, and it would be a really amazing thing to do. I'm not volunteering, to at least try to update it a bit, to actually really understand. Actually, there are basically whole countries where there was nothing, and I know there's lots of things happening in those countries now, particularly in former Eastern Europe, where there was nothing on the website, and now there's significant DDI adoption. So that's part of that, addressing that question.
Wendy, I see your hand was raised. Maybe you can put it down.
Yeah, it was just back to Maggie. Right, and that there, in terms of the priorities that came out of the executive board, there weren't really to do that, but at the same time, there were any funding requests in those areas. So I think it then becomes, it's a way to look at areas are requests, and if you can gap in some priorities that could use some support, is developing funding requests to do specific in those areas to advance those priorities, because I know the ones that came through now were very much from the scientific board side, and so a lot more technical activities and things like that. But I think that's something that the broader executive board and the community needs to look at in terms of supporting the whole set of priorities.
There was a preliminary discussion after these funding requests about thinking about giving more guidance potentially when the next funding round comes out next year. But I think that's quite early stages of thinking. But we are thinking about how all the priorities are actually prioritized. What's a better word? In a more sort of clear way when we go out to the community to ask for funding requests. So that will be coming, no doubt, in some missive to you in the fullness of time. Is there any other questions on Jared's? No?
Yeah.
Excellent.
But before we move to the discussion part, I would like to give my thanks to Jared for the support of the scientific board. You, Jared, are doing a fantastic job for us. You're always there when we need something. You call the meetings. If we are slow with something, you remind us, you bring us together. I just want to thank you very much for that. And from the ICPSR for hosting, it's fantastic. And I want us to give a clap for
Wasn't necessarily a job you absolutely applied for, was it? So it's remarkable that you've job.
It's so good to have you, Jared.
Thank you.
Okay, so all the boring financial stuff's done. So onto the exciting discussions about marketing and some discussions about DDI and standard landscape. So Barry, I think, is going to talk about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, something like that. And then we're going to give us, so that'll give us about 25 minutes or so, 20 minutes for discussion. And then once we've hit on the half hour, we'll have the second part of the discussion. We did think about trying to break up into virtual rooms and all that sort of stuff, but it's just too complicated, unfortunately. So off we go.
Yeah, and I don't have any slides, and I was actually really looking forward to not having to give a report about the marketing group this year, because I had retired last year, but I got roped back in, and now I'm doing facilitating a half-hour discussion on marketing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Darren Radler. I worked for a number of years for a longitudinal study called MIDAS at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we use DDI pretty extensively in that study to document it. And I also became quite heavily involved in the DDI community. I sat on the executive board and chaired the marketing and partnerships group until last year. And I think what last year at this meeting, I gave the marketing and partnerships group update and explained that I was stepping down. And I made the call for, we need new leadership and we need new blood in the marketing group. And I think that's why Jared and Bill then kind of tapped me to lead this discussion about, we're kind of at a pivot point with the marketing group where what's going to happen. But so what we're going to do is going to provide some context about where the marketing group came from. And then Jared, John, and I came up with about 3 discussion points, which I'll try to lead us through. But I'll also preface each of those points with my own opinion. So the Marketing and Partnerships Working Group actually was formed in response to one of the key recommendations from an external review of the DDI Alliance that was conducted in 2011 by this consulting group called Breckenhill. And that was done in 2011. I'm not sure how many people have read that report, but it's always good to go back and review it. The report made a number of recommendations to the Alliance about how it could improve its processes and grow. But it also found a broad need for external outward-facing marketing plans and a implementation strategy basically to promote adoption of the standard and increase Alliance membership. So in 2014, the Alliance included in its strategic plan the creation of the new Marketing and Partnerships Group, and it was tasked with 4 primary activities. And I do wish I had some slides for this, but build partnerships and strategic alliances, assess DDI usage and community needs, improve the DDI website, and create new marketing materials explaining the value of DDI to non-specialists. And I think what Breckenhill had in mind was basically people outside the immediate community, especially a lot of the people doing the development work, trying to explain the value of DDI to other users. So with that in mind, we've framed this discussion around 3 points. And like I said, I'll introduce each of them with some personal comments. And the first one is really, what should the marketing group look like? I'm not sure, since I have been I stepped away in the last year, I'm not sure how much activity there's been with the marketing group, but essentially you do need a new leader. And I think, as a lot of the working groups can attest to, a lot of the effectiveness of these working groups it falls on having a leader who's pretty active and proactive. So along those lines, we need to know what the marketing group's going to look like going forward. But I would suggest, I've always had this opinion that I think that the charge of the responsibilities of the marketing and partnerships groups should be focused. I've always thought that the building partnerships and alliances part was an institutional level responsibility that kind of diluted all this other stuff that the group is charged to promote the DDI standard with. Darren mentioned before about making strategic alliances with other groups. A lot of it seems the partnerships that have developed in these relationships, it's kind of an organic thing, right? But it's also very distinct. Again, it's that kind of institutional level relationship versus a mass strategic communication charge, which is, I think, what the group tended to focus its efforts around. So it's not that the two things, one's more important than the other, but again, I thought it diluted the charge of the marketing group. So maybe it's a good idea to separate those efforts into distinct groups or efforts. I know at the executive board level, the last few years, there's been some informal talks about actually making active pitches to other organizations and companies. This comes back to what Maggie had said before too. The other charge and responsibility of the group that I think should be maybe refocused away from the marketing group is the research and assessment charge. That's a substantial challenge when added to the marketing and communications responsibilities. We tried a couple of research projects over the years, but I think their effectiveness really languished for lack of resources. And again, it usually came down to the chair of the working group making sure this stuff happened. And as everybody in this room knows, doing good research is not a simple or quick thing. What is that?
Who drove you into retirement?
And this is again related to what Maggie said. So, part of the challenge with having an open standard is that, people can use it. They don't have to tell you. You're not going to see, line items where they purchased your product. In past years at this meeting, the best I could do is I would usually fall back on reporting Google Analytics. At least that gave us some kind of quantitative handle on the audience, right? What pages they're using, how many people were accessing the site. But coming back to it, I think that the marketing and research, the marketing and partnerships group needs to be a little bit more focused. And that's the first point, and I don't open it up to feedback and discussion.
How do I talk so that I'm part of it? Barry, thank you. I have read the Brecon Hill.
Yeah, I know.
Many times,
You-
and
I know
it's
you
always worth reading. To address sort of the question you raised and also the point Maggie made, one of the functions of marketing in my mind is not just identifying where your users are, who's using it and for what. It's also figuring out what they don't have that they want. Product marketing is as much a part of marketing as sales and marketing, right? And I feel like that function is weirdly distributed in DDI among the working groups and primarily now falling in TC. I think it would be healthiest to combine that sort of analytics and research function with the working groups that are implementing new features. And I think that's a key connection that we need to make, and maybe pass some of the burden off onto some of the other working groups when they're engaging in those areas. There has to be a better way to skin the cat, because pushing it off into marketing, it didn't work and it was never going to work.
The group that spoke most, I think, clearly that just now was England, talking about, their people are coming to the table with ideas for creating, again, tools.
And then I have a question. How come nobody was at RDA? I went to the RDA plenary. There were lots of us there for the other meetings in Gothenburg. None of us from the DDI Alliance were at RDA networking at what is the single best networking event for approaching new audiences. Now, I can't blame you, you were retired at the time, but that was not always true in the past. And we're missing some pretty big opportunities here by not doing those simple things. So that's my other comment.
I do think, just real quickly, I think there was COVID. Before that, the marketing group was really trying to press the flesh at conferences and not just going to the same old ones. It's we need to be at these conferences.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a hand up.
Wendy.
Yeah, I think Erfan brought up something. One of the things that we're looking at is as we're shifting about how we do development in our different products, and particularly in new areas that we're, new coverage areas, is having a working group that's focusing on what needs to be done and what's required there, as opposed to housing it in a specific product line. And I think there is going to be a good chance that if we can reinvigorate a marketing group, that's a good place to make a really major connection to look at what needs to, what things need to be done, how it gets done in a way that's going to meet the needs of the community that's requesting it. Do it at that level, and rather than as within a specific product.
I'm very conscious there's quite a lot of people who aren't saying very much. I'm sure that you may have views about the way you'd like DDI to be marketed, or things you think are missing, or things that might be improved, things that might appeal to you if you were in a different position. It'd be quite good to hear from someone who hasn't spoken. I know that's a big ask.
Well, why don't I continue with the last two, and hopefully maybe that'll prompt some, because this next issue that we discussed is, so regardless of what this reconstituted group looks like, what is it going to prioritize? And I think the bottom line for the marketing partnerships group has always been to increase adoption and use of the suite of DDI products, right? By individuals and projects. This directly contributes to increases in memberships, and therefore the budget, and by extension, it really gins the whole works. And I always looked at the cost of promotion as an investment. The more people, the more people we can get involved using DDI, it's going to benefit the entire organization. It's going to benefit all the working groups, and indirectly, it's going to benefit the development of good products.
What's the beauty of the meeting? Point that networking is like RDA. I think that a lot of promotion of initiatives like this happens in context or in ways that aren't primarily promotion, or not necessarily word of mouth always, but just through collaborations. I think that it goes hand in hand with whenever DDI appears as a relevant element of the project or a repository or a collaboration, there's an opportunity there to make that appearance be an opportunity for promotion. I don't know how to describe it better, but if we go to our data network and talk to people and use it as an instance for promotion that uses all these like more traditional marketing strategies, so like maybe like this dual strategy for academics and a lot of transmission, right, of ideas who happens when we talk to one another. I think that's probably,
Speaking to that point, I think at least when I was leading the group, what I think what we tried to do was to develop and maintain the website and develop materials. I mean, everything really revolved around the website. If we were at a conference and we were at a booth and we start talking to someone, what's the best thing to do without talking your off or getting into the schema? You point to the website as a reference, right? It's like the center of all our promotional activities. The training videos that we created, the tchotchkes, the branding, the logos that we created, the flyers, all that stuff really kind of points back to the website, so that you have a conversation starter that you can point someone to that to that resource. And along those lines, I think it's out because even though we've put a lot of work into it, a lot of the different groups have helped really improve the DDI website, but it really needs it continues to need management and improvement, and that's much like the rest of the marketing group's responsibilities. That's a real challenge to do when the organization is almost entirely dependent on volunteer time and in-kind contributions. This would come back to the what I always show for too is, the more people, the more audiences that we can pull into the DDI orbit, it's gonna increase the budget if we can get more dues paying members, and that kind of helps us. It's a snowball effect, right? We'll have more money for development, we'll have more money for promotion, and those things are going to feed off of each other.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, I think that's very true. Maybe something like have one of the working groups might be able to fit it into the scope, but something like a primer or a fact sheet or like a little promo, very informational for somebody who doesn't know DDI, but who might have acquainted with it. One of us, like I'm looking at somebody and I'm like, hey, have you thought of DDI? Like a standard document per page where that particular audience, right? Somebody's like heard about it from somebody they might potentially be working with. Like that usually, like that information might be interesting to have it, and everybody knows that's there. That can just promote. Because sometimes you land on the website and it has a lot of great material, but it's hard to know where to start.
Yep.
So and it does have a place actually, I think, that says
get
you started
yep.
with DDI, right? But I don't know whether that can be made.
I want to respond to you. Sounds like you need to join the group that I'm supposedly the chair of. Lucy Marie, a number of us here are involved in this group, and we've been doing very, very focused, and I mean like sample size 4 interviews with different types of users for the getting started part of the website. And I don't know about the rest of you, but some of that, the responses we've gotten have been very surprising. And the website is good in a lot of ways that I didn't think it was good. And it's horrible in ways that I thought it was fine. And that's because I'm old and I don't have pointed thumbs and I have lots of issues. But I actually think that what you're talking about is very much in line with what we're discovering with that activity, is that there are very distinct preferences in parts of different audiences. The website is key. And that activity has convinced me that we need to start putting those pieces together a little more effectively. And to me, that is actually a marketing activity. Like that's a really important marketing activity. I don't know whose auspices we're doing that under, Jared, maybe you know, but
Right now it's under training.
okay, because and training is has a lot in common with marketing, so maybe that's a good fit. But I do think that's a real eye opener, and it's very much getting direct feedback, not from a big group, but it hasn't been a lot of effort to do that, but it's been very, very good in terms of learning exactly what you're talking about. So you should join us.
Yeah, and I think,
We
sorry.
have a name, Jared? I'm the chair. What do we call you?
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay. Very
Okay, and I think also that getting started page was one that's been kind of passed back and forth between training and TC. So there's a couple pages, the resource pages is TC in the learning section, and I think the getting started one has been popped back and forth, so.
Exactly.
So you see, we're all real excited about doing that page because we keep handing it back and forth.
So I need to, I mean, if we can wrap this up and move on to, is that okay, John?
No, but
Okay, go ahead.
so one of the reflections that I have on adoption is that closer we're approached quite often by individual studies and some organisations who want to be documenting longitudinal population data, and we talked about 4, 5, 6 organisations every quarter, and one of the things that sort of trajectory you see or we've experienced has been that the techie people will approach us because they feel comfortable approaching other techie people, and then what they really are asking us isn't really what the benefits are, because they've already been sold on the benefits, because that's why they've approached you. What they want to know is how. They also want to know, how can I sell the benefits to my organisation so they're going to give me the money to go and do the techie thing I've been wanting to really do. And what quite often happens is that those people aren't at sufficiently high, influential level within the organisation to push it to the next level. So I know there's lots of people who are into marketing and pipes and channels and all this sort of stuff. I don't really understand all the detail of that. But what I do know is that quite a lot of the people who are trying to push an organisation to do the right thing in terms of making data transparent and all that aren't in sufficiently senior positions to actually release the budget to do the thing. And I think as I was saying earlier, is we're moving to a world where actually it does require significant investment and a lot of buy-in from the organisation you're in, and it's not something that can be done on the cheap quite often. So that whole thing about how do you push that up the stack? Do you try to? I think someone mentioned stakeholder. Darren mentioned about stakeholder engagement, about coming in over the top. So actually hitting the right level in an organisation to persuade them of the need, business benefits, and then to basically reflect what the techies are also saying. So it's sort of put virtuous triangle or circle or whatever it would be, two-pronged attack in a sense to try to move it along. Because I think quite often there's been a number of places, people we've spoken to who have been absolutely convinced and have battered down, but basically they couldn't convince anyone to release the money. So there's no adoption. So, you know, that's, I think, an important part of the problem. I don't have any solutions, but I think where marketing or outreach or whatever comes into that equation is an important thing from my perspective.
Well, I was going to say, you know, you were talking before about how if you look at the map of where there's been adoption, that there are now whole areas where there's been adoption that wasn't before. And I was thinking, and you were talking about regions of the world, and I was thinking, is that driven by the World Bank or by OECD, right? Is that what that is? And maybe the right marketing strategy isn't a bottom-up, broad-based strategy. It is figuring out what the key institutions are and who will fund this for lots of different, you know, data organizations, statistical organizations around the world, and thinking about how to collaborate with them, and that's actually a more effective strategy, because going and convincing someone they should do something when they don't have the resources doesn't help, right? Whereas actually having somebody who's giving them resources and a mandate, you know, may be actually more effective.
Real quickly, I think both of you are touching on what I opened with, was separating that partnerships with that alliance.
Yep.
Development.
Yes.
It's a distinct activity, very unique.
Do we need a business case, John? To your point, do we need numbers that say this technology will save you X number of person hours? Is that how we sell the top executives? Because without that business case, they're not going to listen to anybody.
Yeah, I don't think having a scientifically rigorous one would be quite easy to do, but I think we could do one off the back of a fag packet and sell it.
I can think of sources, quite credible sources that mention DDI and sign up to it.
Yeah.
That should be enhanced. So I think we can begin to put it together.
Yeah, if I can second that. I mean, just better articulated business cases. I mean, I'm not criticizing the website, but when you hit the website, the first thing you hit is, you know, what you can do with longitudinal data or that kind of thing, that there's no overarching business narrative that kind of hits you in the face there. So yeah, it's a two-pronged thing. I mean, at the archive, for instance, I mean, DDI is largely seen as a technical thing. Now it so happens that I started at the bottom and now I'm in charge of everything. So it kind of, you know, I can pitch DDI for the archive in a way that wouldn't actually be possible if I was thinking about some of my non-technical colleagues. So I think, yeah, better business narratives around that, definitely.
Was there another point you want to?
No, that's it. I think, I mean, first things first, the community has to determine what the responsibilities in charge of a newly reconstituted marketing group going forward is, and then they have to staff it. And that's the first.
So the executive board is charged with re-establishing the marketing group and redefining it slightly better. So part of this discussion has helped, I think, frame some of those, what labels we've got on things, where we try to think about where things resourced to. And I think there will be potentially some more consultation around that potentially, and then I think there'll be some
volunteers out there.
Yeah.
So I thought Barry was being recruited to join Arafon's group, and I didn't hear the yes.
Oh, no, I was recruited.
Oh, well, no, that seems like it's more likely to be effective too. Yeah.
I think I think the other thing is that most of the people involved with the alliance directly in organisations will be techie people or business people. But many organisations, particularly large organisations, do have marketing people who we could think about whether it might be worth approaching some of the marketing people to bring them in to help as an organisational level, membership level, to help with the task, because you know marketeers make very bad developers, and I suspect developers make very bad marketeers.
Exactly.
So perhaps that's the thing. But if you're yourself not interested, you might be able to persuade the organisation to give up a little bit of time to some of the marketing people, the comms people, to at least participate in the early discussions about what things might look like, even if they don't necessarily take up an active role in the long term, to use that experience.
Hilde, did you want to say something?
Yes. I think this is fine, but again, what is done on the scientific or technical level and the communication and the understanding, that is, of course, you can't do it only with the higher executive organizations of people. You need to do it on the lower level also, because then people learn, they can start to use it already. They can communicate to others, their colleagues, their networks, and upwards. Like, for instance, to move to DDI lifecycle at SIC, took a very, very long time, but it came from the employees. And now CDI, a little coming in.
I think the issue is that not there isn't a rule. It's only up, down, up from bottom to top, and just top to bottom. Both strategies work in different circumstances, and you have a different approach to buy-in from those different approaches. So I don't think it's a
both are needed.
one or either. There's ways in which we can tackle them but with different strategies to go in from the top and coming in from the bottom. And that's the thing that I think this discussion has helped to clarify. Nothing else. What else?
Those are my thoughts.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we can move on to the second discussion. Who's leading from this on your side?
Well, we thought it was, since we have been discussing DDI's role a lot, and we've been reporting about our future outlook and the situation, we thought it would be a good idea to discuss a little DDI in the standards landscape. And for that, we will ask Orten to say a few words in the beginning, and then open up the floor for viewpoints from the audience.
Floor is yours.
So I'll keep this pretty brief, because I think Darren already touched on what I'm going to try to say. These are things, Akim Vakaro and myself were invited to the scientific board meeting in Kur last September. And we asked to give presentations about our perceptions of what was going on in the standards world at large and how that would impact DDI. And I want to highlight a couple of things that I think are super important. And again, some of this Darren already mentioned earlier in this meeting. Part of it is that FAIR is a big deal. And in the standards world, when you mention FAIR to people in the DDI community, I think, Wendy, I'm actually going to quote you on this. You said, what else is new, in your totally Wendy Thomas kind of way. And you were right, because we've been doing this for 20 years, right? We've been focused on data reuse for 20 years, and we're good at it. And so when these people come along and say, oh my God, we should be able to reuse data, we're like, yeah, what else is new? But what is new is twofold. One is that there's a lot of money and awareness around this right now, because there's a huge demand for it. And that is what's new. The big dimension that's changed is the cross-domain dimension, to me, is that FAIR within social behavioral economic sciences basically means DDI to a lot of people, and as it should. But we don't have a big challenge there. Where we have a challenge is using data coming from outside and sharing data with domains outside of our traditional domains. Something I've noticed about the grand challenges, things like COVID and climate change and the little research problems that need to be solved, they're all intensively cross-domain, and they all involve people. And the experts in people are us, right? When you talk about demography, there's a reason why we're in population health and social science and economics and official statistics. They don't seem completely related, but they are, because of the way they view people. And so I think that if we're going to leverage that FAIR thing, it's putting huge importance on metadata and standard metadata at a global level, especially in the cross-domain space. So I think that's one thing we have to pay attention to. CDI is, we've learned a lot reaching out to other domains and learning what their data is like. There'll be a session on World Fair on Friday at 9 o'clock at IASSIST, where we will be presenting that project, which is entirely focused on those kinds of problems and doing a cross-domain assessment of what really is needed for FAIR. It might be interesting to people to do that, but one of the things we'll talk about is the cross-domain interoperability framework. DDI is already on the table for that, but that's one approach, and there can be many others with DDI. We have a lot to offer, but we should build on that. So that's sort of one main thing I think that we put on the table in core. The other has to do with what the world expects of standards today, because the RDF people and the semantic web people and whatever they called themselves before that, they had a name. What were they? Open data on the web. I forget. They've had a lot of names, but they have what they call the open world assumption, which says there will always be new information about things on the internet, and you need to be able to pile that stuff as it comes. You need to add to the stack and keep adding new properties to things. And what this means is that they have an unadoptable, unnavigable mess on their hands because no one knows how anything's marked up. DDI did the opposite. We had a strictly closed assumption where everything you needed to know was in the schema, right? And that's all you had to focus on. And everything that we described had to be described in our schema. And we did our best to incorporate things like Dublin Core, and we were good citizens about reaching out and aligning. But the world was still closed. At the end of the day, it had to be in the schema to be part of your system. And that's not where the standards world is going. You go to the W3C, and RDF as a technology allows you, it's an open world technology. You just keep throwing triples on the stack. And now that we're going to be doing DDI stuff in that way, we have to align with the way people approach standards in that world, which is little standards doing focused things and combining lots of them. And the ability, the ease with which you can adopt multiple vocabularies in RDF is mind-blowing. You just sort of say, okay, we're going to start using triples from this one, and you add them to your profile. The problem is that people don't know which vocabularies are being used by whom. And so the culture is to listen to W3C primarily and to try to use the ones that everybody else is using. So we see things like DCAT, schema.org is a big deal, Prov. There are a small number of very, very successful vocabularies. XCOS is quite successful, actually, from what I've seen. SCOS is huge, but those things we have to think as we define our new product suite about the modular use at the way that the RDF people see it, because it's actually really different than the way the XML people see it. The other piece of that picture is about technology, because XML is a closed world technology. And a lot of people don't like XML. They don't use XML. They like JSON. If you say JSON LD, they scratch their head and go, isn't that sort of like that old RDF stuff that we don't use anymore? You hear that from developers, and people are paying a lot of attention to things like GraphQL. Python is a big deal. R used to be a big deal, but maybe it's not as big a deal as Python is. I don't know. There's an increasing speed with which these technologies supplant each other. So the shift to being model driven, I think, is the right approach. And some of the stuff that Wendy was talking about being able to bind those models into new syntax representations, really, really important. But what I would say to that is there is a group of people who don't even do RDF. They only really do APIs. And that's a lot of your JSON people. They're used to living in a world where things like GraphQL and JSON are their tools of choice. And I think that we need to revisit some of our assumptions about technology representation and figure out how can our models better be deployed and packaged for adoption in that very modular, very combinatory way with other things that are designed from W3C and elsewhere that are designed that way. I think CDI, we learned a lot doing it about the way the world is structured, the new world, as it were. But I think we can't ignore that. That's huge. So with that, I would sort of stop. I think that's about the kind of what we presented in core. But I think that I think it's a pretty good appraisal of what's out there right now. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I don't know who you want to moderate that.
This is just a real quick aside, real quick, Hilde and I were talking during the interim. A lot of people don't know what DDI is, they know what FAIR is. And I know we were pushing that in the marketing group for a long time. Just hammer the hell out of FAIR as being DDI.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And in the context of FAIR, the conversation a lot of the time is dominated by, am I compliant with the Fuji tool, which basically just scrapes your landing page. I think there are some assumptions we make about how remedial, a level people are operating at. And, just simple messages like, just replace your CSV file with DDI, and that will take you a lot further towards FAIR or the aspirations of FAIR than merely, putting the right tags on your landing page. So I think there's, I made the point earlier that in no way is this a saturated market. We probably assume that the level of, structural markup of data is, we probably assume it's higher than it actually is. So I think that there's a huge untapped market that, through FAIR, that, just stop using CSVs, or not stop using CSVs, but do you know that you can actually get structured data in a fairly straightforward way, both, for the social, because we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, it is life cycle is, largely a social sciences domain. I think there's the interoperability aspect where we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there is a core social sciences stuff there as well. But there's such a, not a vacuum, but it's such an untapped market there at the moment.
But I think it's a two-way street in the modern world, which is that a lot of people want the data that we have.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone wants things like census data for reference, as reference. And that's true in so many domains. And that's also true of other social science data. They just don't know how to get it. And it's not accessible to them. And that's something that we could do. And that's like I said, it's a two-way street there. It's not just us using their stuff, it's vice versa.
Okay, Dan?
Yeah, this is interesting. Eric, and what you were sort of describing as maybe an ill fit between DDI and other web standards around open world and closed world assumptions. I'm not sure that we have that right, and I think it's worth having a detailed discussion about that to figure out what the what's really going on. I'm a little concerned that we might be going down the wrong path by looking at framing the problem.
Did I respond?
Yes, please.
All I can speak from, Dan, is what I've seen trying to do CDI implementation. But as an example, Interstat, INSEAD, was working on a European project, and they already use a lot of RDF, and they use notably SCOS. And the idea that they would use a different set of classes to describe concepts or code lists or classifications. No, they were never going to do it. They were going to use what they had in their systems. And the fact that CDI was okay with that we designed it to leverage that concept definition meant that that wasn't a problem for them. But there was no way they were ever going to re-implement the stuff that they had to support yet another language when they were perfectly happy with the one they had. And that's not always true, but that's the sort of use case we have to focus on as we do that kind of detailed analysis. I'm not really disagreeing with you, Dan. I'm just saying, like, we have to be very practical about what people already have and what they're willing to do when they implement a new standard. Because it's not as broad as it used to be.
That's a different problem than what I heard. Okay.
Well, there are many problems, as you know, but that's
Yes, I wanted to mention that regarding interoperability, that is very much in focus now on many different areas. For instance, within the European Open Science Cloud, they have different initiatives and they have working groups working on semantic interoperability and so on. And there are basically, they reckon there are several layers of this, that you have organizational interoperability, you have legal interoperability, you have semantic interoperability, and you have technical interoperability. And DDI is more as a standard. It is more on the semantic layer, and also touching on technical with a new implementation and developers group and so on. And what we see, for example, on legal interoperability is also becoming more and more important now. For example, like you, Darren, are working now around sensitive data and data
Yeah,
disclosure.
well, I think, there comes a point where people suddenly realize that, actually this interoperability is immediately much more difficult when you start addressing data that isn't open. And then quite quickly people realize there aren't really many standards to adequately describe idiosyncratic access workflows. Almost every organization that I can think of has its own access classification. So, there's some rich pickings there just to do some simple standardization on the way we deal with access classifications, but also the way we manage access workflows. So in fact, we've got a panel tomorrow, Steve McEachran, where we'll talk about some of these things. But it's kind of so obvious. It wasn't really obvious at all until we noticed it. So yeah, I think, it's not just legal. There's a whole kind of information model to be built here around the difference between privacy, disclosure risk, sensitivity, confidentiality, all of which are quite different things. And I'm not suggesting we get bogged down in a mire of definition, but we certainly need a lot more structured metadata that accommodates those things. Now, that's not necessarily the role of DDI to do that, but certainly DDI needs to make those extension points easy and seamless for when those information models get built.
Yes, thank you. And that is my point also. I think DDI should stick to what it's doing on that level, but that we need to kind of be able to work together with standards in these other interoperability areas also that are getting more and more important. Any other comments, John?
Yeah. So one of the things that attracted me to DDI as a standard a long time ago was that it was focused on data and describes data and statistical data particularly well. And not just statistical data, but data at a column or variable level. And it's one of the few standards, I don't know what other ones are around. I can't think of any really off the top of my head. CSVW, no one uses CSVW, apart from Jenny Tennyson and a couple of her mates. Sorry, that wasn't good. Yeah, there are very few standards that support a variable, a column of data. And all the things that people have been talking about are things that relate to that, so privacy and all that, but they hang off the fact that we describe a column of data. And no one else does that. And I don't think we actually really say that very much. And I think the world needs to describe columns of data and attach stuff to that, whatever the problems are, and there are lots of them. But having the column of data described is the fundamental core of all the other stuff. And no one else describes the column of data, or very few people do. So that, to me, is the biggest strength of DDI. And we hang off all sorts of other stuff on that, the vocabularies and all the rest of it. But that's the big selling point in a world where the data set is dead. The column of the variable, people want to know the variable, they want to know the provenance of the variable, they want to do machine learning. Actually, you can't do that just going somewhere in this bucket of data, I've got stuff that might look like something.
Do you know where people are encountering variables a lot in the fair world? Schema.org. They have a variable. It's not a very good variable, but they've actually got one finally, after multiple.
Eventually now, okay.
But they're also pretty open to working with other organizations that specialize in particular areas. I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe it'd be worth going to Dan Brickley and saying, Dan, let's talk about your variable. It's a little embarrassing. Maybe we can, give it some.
Just up a bit.
Yeah, and maybe he would be receptive to that because variables are becoming an in-demand thing from. things like
But
that. I don't know if that's.
But at its core, the whole point of DDI was you had data coming in different formats, different disciplines. You wanted one way of describing it all, and that was achieved over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And actually, someone's missed that, and we're not selling it very well. I think that is, for me,
But they're finding it.
a priority for us.
Not from us. They're finding it in schema data.
Oh, yeah, they're finding
So maybe-
second-rate versions of.
But maybe that's
description of a variable.
maybe that's the way that we connect them. I mean, I'm just trying
No,
to
that's good.
take what you're.
Yeah. I think that's.
I think, so I focus on the exact same problem, and that is like people like have this challenge of needing to know what the column of data is. The problem that I've seen is people don't know that that's a problem. Like that's the focus that we've been challenged with right now is like you're talking about a problem that people don't even know they have. And that's what every one of us is focused on is we need to find the problem that they have before we can help them understand that. And then the challenge that I've seen is it's very hard to go up to someone and go, and this is the reality of what we're doing, is you're doing it wrong. You don't know anything about the data and you need to solve that problem. And they go, oh no, I know what my data means. Like, and it will shut down conversations is.
What do you think if you examples of that? Cases where there are decisions made and steps taken in ignorance of that problem.
The broader public sector, I think, is a really good example of where decisions are made in ignorance.
How popular is FAIR in Australia, Sam? How big an inroad is there? Because FAIR is the thing that's changing that in places like Europe today. For the first time.
I won't take air away from Steve McKenna, who knows a lot more about the academic space than I do, but I think from a public sector perspective, it's not known.
It's not there yet.
And that's quite broad across like a lot of the markets we work in is like, again, I think that going back to what you were saying earlier, Darren, like we can talk with technical people to understand the challenges here, but the rest of the organization doesn't understand their problem. Like I've worked with, where we're starting to get adoption in HR and finance, and I've looked finance groups, I've looked CFOs in the face, and they've gone, we don't have data. I'm like, you run an accounting system. You don't have data. Like these are organizations who don't even understand their own internal definition. What it is, right? We're talking about vocabulary. These are the challenges we have. Is what we need to do is not focus on the problem of data, no offense, because we know that's the problem. We need to identify what their problem is and tell them why DDI is the solution or why better metadata is the solution. Like that's where we need to focus on is we're talking to people who are outside of this group quite ignorant. Like, and I'll say that quite proudly is we all understand the challenge. Like the answer is metadata. Like duh. Like if I said that to anybody in this room, you'd laugh me out. What we need to do is help people understand the problem.
Well, this is a really interesting discussion in number one. I think it gets fundamentally to the issue, the more foundational issues that the DDI Alliance is facing, whether it's marketing, whether it's everything. And I think, John, when you said, reminded me the R FAIR is reuse, and that often is the thing that separates other users of data than the people in social sciences in a sense, because and the archives, because their goal is to get the data reused. So if you're going to have it reused, you have to document it in a way where the original collector, so like an administrator, an accountant, they know their data, they live with it every day. But if they had to export that for another user to use, then they would see, oh yeah,
We need
But-
metadata documentation.
Again, reuse is somebody else's problem.
But
Like that's
but
not
it's-
like, but again, that's the archivist dilemma. It's like somebody else using my data is somebody else's problem. And if I know my data right now, and it's a conversation for a day, is like, and this is why there's such a difficult challenge identifying what their problem is.
Exactly, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that's why a lot of people don't see the importance of this. But I think it's fundamental to why DDI was developed. And so, and just in my sample, where I'm at, the research community has been transforming all over because at the 800 pound gorilla where I am are the people in sciences and engineering, because they have all the money and the status, and they have all the programmers, the data scientists and everybody, and they have their own way of doing things. And so they may appreciate the social science long-term contributions to help them do their stuff, but they have their ways of doing things. And so I think that's the other conundrum, because they're the ones who are driving data right now.
Two comments, one to you, Sam. Let me give you the PricewaterhouseCoopers report on the cost of having unfair data to Europe. Because they put in billions of euros, the cost of not being able to share data. And that gets the policy people's attention, and they tell the people in the public sector what to do with their data. Right, and that's a good document, and there may be a couple of other pieces that you could use to begin to make that case very Eurocentric, but it's making the case for fair that led to the current feeling in Europe. The other thing, Ron, is that I was at a CoData XCOM meeting, and I was chatting at dinner with a guy who's trying to introduce FAIR and standards, metadata standards, into NASA for all of their data. And you know what kind of data they have? It's not social science. And they are their own gorilla. They're so big, they're a whole colony of gorillas, right? Like, I don't know how many data centers they have. They're huge. And their internal standardization is a big deal. But that, I think they have all the same problems in a microcosm, but they do at the end of the day have the same problems. And so I think that there's a way to approach those communities with the idea of data reuse. And maybe they're at a different place in that progression. But I think a lot of what we do actually is relevant. We have to recast it in a way that is more about FAIR, I think, than it is about the social science and life cycle stuff that's very domain specific in DDI. But I think we can begin to do that maybe.
I mean, that's why Hilde's comment that, in a sense, I interpret it to be, let's not lose ourselves in this other thing. Let's have confidence that we've got something that is we're continuing to build, and that eventually others will also see the value.
Yeah.
Wendy's.
Dan is first.
Okay.
The comment that I was going to make is sort of out of sequence now, so.
Okay, so.
20.
I've muted and unmuted myself so many times, I didn't know where I was. I think the problem that was just brought up is something that we also faced in the whole thing where we went from codebook to lifecycle, was you couldn't get people to do metadata because it was, as you know, they said it's somebody else's problem. And it was like, as we say in the US, it's all mom and apple pie and good things to do and polish your star and you've been a good citizen. But one of the reasons for the whole development of lifecycle was the only way you get people who create data to also create good metadata is to make it pay off in their process. And unless you know what and understand what their process is on this, you're not really going to get them to do that for you. And perhaps in a lot of these other disciplines, it's not the same payoffs places that there were when we did social sciences, because our big payoff was with large research institutes, with statistical agencies, where being able to reuse metadata to be able to inform the person down the road who was going to use the statistic that was the outcome of this, what changes were being made, why they were being made, so they could model what that might do to their evaluation of the data that came out the other end of the process, had real value to them. And so maybe it's a different set of payoffs in NASA or in a number of these other topical areas, but part of it is going to where they are and finding out what pays off for them and forming your sell to them in terms of what their issues are.
I also think it is good to do this with these cross-domain use cases, because there you can maybe take their data and do something with it in DDI, for example, and you can show the benefit from that. You can show dealing with their data and social science data together, for example, using different DDI products and so on. And that could be good use cases. I realize I'm working on the SICT project that Orten described. It's not only SICT, S&D is involved with it, and the ESS, and also some ENRI people. And it is about combining climate data with social science data. And I was at the big conference for European geoscientists with 15,000 people on site, and I had a poster, and the interest in this was so big. And I also presented DDI and the metadata aspect of this. And afterwards also there was a lot of interest about collaboration, about what the metadata could do and everything. So that was a really, for me, a really good experience. And I think we can engage like this cross-domain, and that can be a way to work.
Hilde, since you're not going to toot your own horn, I'm going to toot it for you.
Okay.
One of the editors of Nature, I forget which Nature was,
Yeah.
and asked Hilde to write an article to publish in Nature.
Yeah, nature sustainability. It is a sub-domain under nature.
That's actually a pretty enthusiastic response to a poster at a conference, if you ask me. Like,
Yes.
I think there's actual interest in some of this stuff, and people don't even know it's possible. So.
No, many people said, "Oh, this is something I never heard about," and things like that. So for me, it was a really good experience, and also proves that it can be a way to go. Really.
I'm curious about, I haven't been in the space very long, so I'm curious about adoption of DDI in public health research. The reason I ask is because we had in our working group a Canadian discovered metadata working group. We had a researcher from Ottawa approach us with an idea of seeing how we could help him create a pan-Canadian metadata repository for public research data. And one of his goals was to find data by Darren, meet with their burial of discovery. And we're going to discuss it again as a group to see how we can help. And for me, the first question was, have you been? What's like, could DDI, right, play a role there? But evidently, that was the response of the group, at least in Canada, health research that could use DDI doesn't really, like, there aren't any standards that are applied that broadly that could make such a project feasible. At the very, at the most, you could be, aggregating some metadata and make it discoverable, but at that level, it would be impossible at this time. It would take a lot of work. But I just wanted to maybe ask the group of what, whether DDI is playing a role in public health research data at the moment, or not at all, or.
Start, sure. Start. Okay. Yes, there is use of DDI in public health. I'll give you two answers. One was a study that was commissioned by, what did they call themselves? Well, it was Welcome, but they had a group of the big funders in public health. And we did a project just assessing the discoverability and usability of the most popular data sources in public health. And so even to me, it was a surprise that all of the ones that got the best rating in terms of usability were coming out of institutions that use DDI. All of them, like not all of them, but like 60–70%. It was ridiculous. I had no idea. That's kind of an old document now. I can point you to it. But there's work going on now, and this is part of the World Fair project, among other things that I'll talk to you about, on Friday and some other people. But it's a project Inspire looking at population health surveys that were traditionally done with DDI codebook for many, many years. And this gets back to the in-depth network and some earlier efforts. And that stuff is now being integrated with the Odyssey OMOP Common Data Model, which is an observational health model that turns out to be the integration point for HL7, CDISC, and Odyssey. So a bunch of standards in the health space. It's a clinical record standard is what it is. And we're having to do surgery on it to make it fit population health. Because at the end of the day, what we take out of that, they share databases, not data sets, but the users want an SPSS file or a STATA file usually with their codebook, right? So DDI fits into that in a very different way than it traditionally did, but the data producers, the survey people have DDI, and then we may need to serve it on the backside. But so those are completely different use cases, but they're both used, like there's different uses of DDI in different parts of public health. John can have a different answer.
Well,
probably.
I think, sorry, I was just going to mention that the biggest, in terms of public health data, is World Bank, and World Bank uses, so it's very easy to spot the thing that's received in front of you, and that's been the mainstay of disseminating that data for
It's only
a long time. So
it's only 198 countries, John. What are you talking about?
There's a photo.
I can't see that far from it somewhere.
Oh,
Hi, Bodil.
Hello.
Hi.
I see my battery is almost empty here, but I have a few minutes. I wanted to express that I think the cases you have been talking about now at the end, the practical use cases are maybe the most powerful ways to promote the tool, the CDI model. Yeah, because by showing the job that can be done towards the great challenges and towards combination of data from various domains in practice, I think that is the stories that talk the loudest and that is the easiest to understand for a wider community. I mean, fear is powerful, but it's also a bit theoretical. But when you can show what can be done in practice, I think that's the easiest road to go.
Okay, thank you, Bodil. Any comments to Bodil's statements? No, very good, Bodil. Thank you. Somebody else?
Just wondering, Erica, if you could just expand a little bit about what you said about making DDI modular, more modular, or living in a world in which things have to be modular and everybody is communicating straight together.
I think what it means is this. DDI does certain things better than any other standard model. And maybe the best example of that is the way that DDI lifecycle describes a questionnaire. There are many, many, many descriptions of questionnaires out there. And I think it was Sam, you wrote an article about this, about the fact that that's actually the most computable model. If you're full of go-tos and other kinds of constructs, those models aren't computable. And so one of the use cases we have at places like INSEE are people who use lifecycle to drive production of their surveys from the metadata. And that's the very powerful and efficient model. But it comes with a lot of baggage about the adoption of lifecycle overall, because we assume that the system will be a DDI system. And what they might want is a small part of that a small portion of a model that does one thing well. And that needs to be something they can pick up and identify and deploy. And when you talk about modular, I think that's the kind of packaging we need to do. In CDI, we tried to focus very narrowly on data, on describing data of a range of types. and then describing the processing framework around it. And we didn't do any of the study level information. We didn't do any of the other stuff DDI can do. We just said, those are the smaller parts of the model for this one function kind of. And I think that is, it's modularity in terms of functionality, not modularity in terms of related metadata elements. And that's, I think, an important distinction, if that makes sense to you. And we sort of have to figure out what is it that people want to do with DDI, and then you identify, okay, here's a reasonable chunk of information to support doing that, and a way of representing it that everyone agrees on.
So Wendy, do you want to come back again?
Yeah, one of the things and one of the major things that we're doing in the version 4 for lifecycle is, just because it is a structural piece, is really kind of finalizing that move from a very structured, buried almost a publication and management structure of the lifecycle content to a very serialized structure of the elements that are within it, so that you can go through and identify those subsets of elements and things that are used to support specific applications. Where I found the problem is we were going through the moving forward project and in some of the other ones, and we were trying to do views and we were trying to do all these kinds of things that when you got this goes in this module, this goes in that, we have a number of pieces of information that are used for multiple applications, and there are places where information is used to cross over between different applications. It is used because they simply use the same information bases. And so to me, the modularization becomes more, let's serialize the content and then descriptively say, these are the set of material of elements and set of information for this type of application. But if you're then, because then you can start talking about where the edges are and where it touches in other applications and other uses. But it's not a strict line anymore. And I think this is one of our big problems that we ran into when we were doing views as we were doing the moving forward project.
Okay.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. I'm not sure anyone wants to repeat the discussion around views very quickly. I certainly don't want to.
That gives you a sharp stick in the eye.
Just thinking about it.
I don't think that is needed.
Yeah, indeed. So we're running up to the end of the hour. I think it's been, I'd like to thank all the people who participated, particularly a lot of the work put in by the scientific board. It's really, really detailed. The discussion, I think it's probably the best discussion we've had at an annual meeting for one I've attended anyway. So I think it's been really, really valuable discussion, a really interesting discussion about different aspects of both the bureaucracy of running an alliance, of an organization, and also the reason many of us, things we're really interested in is the geeking out on all the other stuff as well. So it's something for everybody in the organization, the bureaucrats and the developers and everyone in between. Again, I'd like to thank Jared for organizing the whole event. Is there anything I've missed?
Yes.
Say?
Thank you for joining, and thank you for taking part of the discussion. Highly appreciated, and for all of the work that everyone is doing.
We have stickers and buttons and speakers
Okay.
out on the table. Please take them so I don't have to carry them along.
And if you want to take some to distribute, contact Jared and I'm sure we can get some to you.
Just grab a stack.
No people up there. A lot of people in the room. Okay, and I'm going to close the meeting then.
Okay,
Thanks very much. Take care.
bye.